Uh-oh, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, and we just went live.
Good, sorry.
No, that's no problem. Welcome to the latest Humpday Hangout. It's the first Wednesday of the month. That means we're talking training. I'm Steve Pegram, one of your co-hosts from ISFSI. My co-hosts Brad and Aaron are here, and obviously Bobby Halton just joined us. We're going to talk about basement fires specifically today and the ongoing ISFSI UL basement fire study. But before we go into that, Bobby, you got any words of wisdom or information you want to share with the Humpday Hangout community?
Yeah, there's so much going on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're going to talk basement fires. There's so much going on. I know there's great research happening with the Instructor Society, and thank you for doing that. Some fantastic stuff going on with our friends from NIST, who are doing some studies at the same time on some more in-depth fire behavior stuff. Just had a great conversation, which is why I was late, with a group of scientists headed up by a guy named Pete Sutherland, who just did an extensive study on hoses and nozzle reaction and flow rates, which is mind-blowing. And they're going to be working with a team of fire service experts to kind of put that into English for us all. Some amazing stuff going on with the technology of things, if you will, the Internet of Things. Obviously Moore was right in '71 when he came out with Moore's Law, and obviously Kurzweil expanded on it when they talk about the exponential growth of stuff, especially stuff that can be informationalized, just exploding for the fire service. So some really neat stuff coming up technologically that we're going to be talking about into the future. Some great work being done on the command side of it, evaluating psychological reactions to command. So it's a lot of really great research happening there. Some really neat stuff that's going to be released pretty quickly regarding that. Some great new books in the pipeline by some really wonderful people. There's some great stuff in up. Chris Daly's book on driving, a bunch of other people's stuff happening out there. So that's going on. Real big favor to ask of everybody, if you don't mind. We always talk about supporting our veterans and our fellow firefighters. The Sons of the Flag have asked me to voluntarily jump out of an airplane to raise money for wounded veterans and firefighters, and I've agreed to do it on September 20th, and I'd really love your help if you can see your way clear to donating $5-10. I'm trying to raise 10 grand, so if you can help me do that, I'd be eternally grateful. So that's going on. I'll be in Arizona next week hanging out with our good friends at the Arizona Fire Chiefs Conference. Chief Brunicini and I will be there doing all kinds of goofy stuff. I'll be back in New York hanging out with the New York City Fire Department and a bunch of our board members the week after that, then heading over to an NFPA committee meeting where we're doing some really cool stuff, and guys and gals are talking about decontamination. And we all know about the Scafella method, what the Swedes are doing, and we're incorporating pieces of that. I had a great conversation recently with Gavin Horn, and we're going to be releasing a ton of information for Gavin and the Illinois Fire Institute in the immediate future about some of their findings down there, as well as the Firefighter Cancer Support Network's second white paper is coming out pretty soon. So other than that, not much going on in the fire service, but thank you for letting me give everybody a quick update.
Well, thank you for letting us be on here. And I always forget to mention it right at the beginning, but if you're following along with us, you want to ask a question or a comment, you can do so on Twitter, #FE-Talk, which stands for Fire Engineering, #FE-Talk on Twitter. You can post something, we're monitoring that, and that's a good way to get a question into the panel while we're talking about basement fires and anything else ISFSI, Penwell Fire Engineering related. Our topic for today is talking about the ongoing basement fire research project that ISFSI is doing. It's a grant-funded project through the AFG program, and we partnered with UL. So UL is handling the scientific side of the research, and the research is being done at the Delaware County Fire School in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia, PA. We put together a technical panel that has met a few times already, and we'll get more in depth on that in a second. But I just wanted to allow each of our panel members, those that are regulars or those that are guests, just to chime in for a second. Quick introduction, but also why would we want to study basement fires? What are some of the things in your career that have been unique or challenging that would want us to look more at basement fires and our strategy and tactics. So Seth, if you want to kick it off as our guest this month, we'll look to you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Seth Barker. I'm from southwest corner of Montana in a place called Big Sky, Montana. I'm a captain and training officer there, and also I am director at large for the ISFSI. The basement fire study is a pretty cool thing to be involved with, especially from my standpoint. I live in a community that is just exponentially growing as far as construction and new people moving into town, and we have this huge mega mansion kind of threat in our town. And almost every single one of these houses and homes being built have tremendous livable walkout basements with, the classic 360 challenges of having it be on a steep slope on the Charlie side and then the street side view on the Alpha side. So this really hits home to us because we've seen a growth in basement fires in our organization, and trying to come up with strategies and tactics to effectively mitigate that upon arrival, and having science-based tactics to back those procedures up. So I'm really super interested in this whole process that we're going through from this grant, and most particularly as far as, how do we deal with walkout basements? What's the best tactic to use upon arrival?
Sure. Aaron, you want to chime in a little bit? Why do we want to look at basement fires? Why are they different?
Well, basement fires are near and dear to me because over the years I've been to a lot of them, and obviously here in the Northeast, once you get in from the coast, they're everywhere. And when we have beyond basements, we have cellar fires as well, which where there's one way in, one way out, lack of ventilation, huge fire loads. So we go back to the old style of how we had to deal with that, and now with the lightweight construction and as Seth said, the walkout basements and the finished basements, even in normal residentials where everybody's trying to get a little extra living space in the dwelling. So I think the research is very important, and I think that the technology of how we're doing it, the flow rates of how we're doing it, just like Bobby said in the very beginning, the studies of flow rates and things like that, and how we're getting lines into places, it's all going to come into play more so now than ever. And there's less experience at it, so we have to train harder at it, and that way we. It's just going to be another evolving thing. I'm glad that the study's coming out. I think it's important that we get on it because these fires aren't going to go away. As Seth said, these fires are going to continue to keep coming up, and the numbers of them are going to come up, and that's what we're going through. So I'm looking forward to seeing the results. I think it's great.
Awesome. Brad, you want to give us a little basement fire perspective from Dayton, Ohio?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chief Brad French, Lieutenant, Dayton, Ohio, and also on the board of directors for the ISFSI. I think when you talk about basement fires, the case studies kind of speak for themselves. I mean, we can sit here and just, Cherry Road in Washington, D.C., Mark Falkenhand in Baltimore County, and, Pater Avenue and Squirrel's Nest Lane in Southwest Ohio, Diamond Heights in San Francisco. The list goes on and on and on and on of notable case studies from basement fire incidents. And so it really, just the fact that we have so much discussion about basement fires and know of so many notable line of duty deaths with lessons learned from basement fires really speaks to the need for some additional scientific information on that and some science-based tactics for basement fires. I think, and I've never really crunched the numbers, and maybe Bill Carey with all the stuff that he does with line of duty death statistics could help me out in doing this sometime, but crunch the numbers in terms of the ratio of firefighter fatalities to working basement fires. And I think I talk about this in PMFA classes across the country all the time. The fact that if you could look at the number of working fires that someone has that the American Fire Service responds to versus line of duty deaths from a hostile fire event, and compare that ratio to the number of working basement fires that the American Fire Service responds to, and compare that to the ratio of line of duty deaths, I think that you'd find that the ratio of line of duty deaths and significant injuries from hostile fire events is much higher in proportion for basement fires than it is for first and second floor fires. And again, like I said, I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but I think a lot of the case studies and things like that kind of speak for themselves that is probably in fact the case in the American Fire Service, is that basement fires present a much proportionally higher danger to the fire service across the country. And so I'm very much so excited about the study and can't wait to see the results as well.
Absolutely. Everybody brings up good points. And when I go back to the decision by the society to make this our next project and to partner with UL, it related specifically back to some basement fires we had in my local jurisdiction. Unfortunately, 2 of which were civilian fatalities. But we're seeing more and more where people are either upgrading into bigger homes or newer homes, and a lot of those are now being built with half or 3/4 or even fully finished basements, where basements used to be unfinished spaces. But the bigger thing we're seeing is we have a lot of housing stock that was built in the 50s and 60s, and people, rather than moving, are converting basements that were originally unfinished into finished spaces. And when they do that, they often don't consider all the building codes and things like that. They go to Home Depot, they buy some lumber, they throw up some walls and stuff like that. If they do any plumbing, it pretty much is locked into where the drains are in the floor and things like that. And so you end up with some very weird floor plans. And in one we had in Goshen, we were told there was a subject trapped in a basement bedroom. But to get to that basement bedroom, you had to go down the stairs, through a living room, into a laundry room, through the laundry room to a bathroom, through the bathroom to the second bedroom. So not a normal layout that you would see in a residential home, or if it had been built to code, and created some significant challenges. So that's really what got me thinking about it. And like some of the other panel members have mentioned, we have seen an uptick in our working fires occurring in basements. And then going back to historically, I think it would be interesting to see those numbers, but there are several line of duty death investigations that we know of involving basement fires. And so that segues right into how we put this project together. So the funding is coming from the AFG program. ISFSI's role is basically to manage the grant. And on the back side of it, we'll be developing some training programs that will go out and deliver to the fire service about the project. But the big part of the project is the technical panel. And so we've put together a tech panel of people, and I wanted to talk about them real quick. So we thought it was important, obviously, to partner with somebody who knows more about the scientific side of fire than we do. And that organization is UL, Firefighter Safety Research Institute. So Steve Kerber, Dan Majikowski, Robin, their whole crew have done a lot of work doing firefighter or fire-related research. And they're handling the research side. So they are on site in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, as we speak, burning every few days, trying all kinds of different scenarios of basement fires. They have a full prop. It's an actual house built just like a house on a basement. And they are running through things. And coming up in July 13th, if anybody is interested, we're having an open to the public observation day. So if you're watching this, if you have an interest in the research studies, if you can get yourself to Delaware County, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia by the Philadelphia airport, July 13th, we'll be doing tours of the prop. All the ISFSI and UL people will be on site to answer questions, and they'll actually be doing a research burn that day. So you'll be able to walk through the prop and see everything and how it's laid out, as well as see the burn and then see the final results and have an opportunity to talk to the training people, the fire people, and the research people. Again, July 13th, you can sign up at isfsi.org, and it's free. But we put together the technical panel. So we've got the ISFSI people managing the grant, working on the training aspect. We've got the UL staff down in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, burning stuff for us. And then we thought it was important to bring those departments that Brad mentioned. So we have a representative from Coleraine, Ohio. We have a representative from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have a representative from the PA Fire Academy, which actually had a line of duty death of an instructor in a basement fire, but it was a training basement fire. San Francisco and Washington, D.C., Cherry Road, which was probably one of the first line of duty death studies that was ever done looking at flow path and ventilation and fire attack. So they have reps on our tech panel that have met multiple times and will be on site July 13th working on this project. And then we also reached out to some other partner agencies. So the IAFC Safety, Health, and Survival section, the IAFC Company Officers section, and the IAFC Volunteer and Combination Officers section all have representatives on this tech panel. And it's basically the job of the tech panel to ask the questions, and then the researchers from UL get us the answers and get us the data. And then we'll crunch that data and hopefully share that at the end of the project. But that's sort of how the whole thing is made up and what we're doing. I'd like to turn back to some of our guys that are involved in that process. Maybe Seth, you can lead us. Maybe just give an overview of what we've done so far and where we're at with the project.
Yeah, so I think, as of last week, we were up to about 6 burns. I believe they've done 2 more burns since then. And kind of the methodology behind it is they've created a very substantial prop with a basement that they can replace the walls and the ceiling and not lose structural integrity from the house from a collapse standpoint. And so the amount, first and foremost, the most impressive part about this study is the amount of work that UL is putting into this. It's a tremendous amount of work, and that's what I was just blown away about when I visited on site. But back to the test, the burns are, I think we're at, again, about 8 burns so far, and we're simulating kind of 3 different types of basements. The first one, we went round and round is what do we call these basements in San Francisco, and what do we call them in New York City, and what do we call them in Vermont? But basically, Dan Majikowski came up with a really kind of overview picture of how we define these basements. And it comes down to no exterior access, meaning you have only access from a stairwell inside, or exterior access by a small window only. And how we define that is a firefighter can't fit through that window, and then exterior access that a firefighter can fit through a window or a door. And that would be like the classic walkout basement type of thing. And so based on those 3 access points, we're manipulating hose streams both from an interior standpoint and an exterior standpoint to see what effect they have on the interior of the structure. They're saying about 3 days of work of replacing this prop goes into 1 burn, and that 1 burn happens very quickly. We're talking like 16 to 22 minutes. I'm not sure what the last one was, Steve. It went a little bit longer than that, but the actual burning goes really quickly. It's the redoing the prop to make sure that prop is consistent and built the same every single time. So again, the work that these guys at UL was just staggering that I witnessed. It's a really amazing thing to see. And so we get the fires burning. Again, try to manipulate the stream placement, the stream type, the nozzles, and then moving forward, see what effect that has both in the interior and from the first and second floor, being what impact it has in the bedrooms and what impact it has on the overall structure.
I think it's important to add too, Seth, one of the questions we get a lot about the research burns is they're not realistic, they're not real fires. And in this case, this is a true real home. We hired a home builder to build the house. And so all the building materials that went into it are the same building materials that would go into a normal home. And unlike a training burn where you're following NFPA 1403, these are not training burns, these are research burns. So they are actually using a carpet pad, carpet, real furniture, real tables, real chairs, all the furnishings of a normal home are being put in this. So trying to replicate what we're actually would see in the field. And the other thing we did notice when we were there burning the other day, because these burns are being done out on in an open area at the training facility, not inside a building, the environment is having an effect on this research, which is realistic. I mean, in the real world, we have wind. We have cool days, we have warm days. And so we had changing wind conditions and changing wind directions having an effect on the ventilation as we did some of the burns that when the tech panel was on site. So as realistic as we can make it to real world, I think we have done that with this project, as we have in some of the previous projects. But every time, like Seth said, that they do a burn, once it's out and extinguished, they're stripping everything down to bare bones and rebuilding it back. So not only are they doing the research, but there's a whole lot of drywalling and mudding and painting and cleaning up all the water, ripping out all the carpet, and everything gets replaced before each sequential burn. So kind of unique. If you can make it out July 13th and see it face to face, I think you'll be impressed. But I wanted to mention that as well. As we talk about basement fires and we're talking to the tech panel, a lot of the departments that had line of duty desks shared a lot of interesting information with us. And then we got a lot of feedback from other tech panel members. I wanted to throw out to our panel here today. one of the comments that we've heard multiple times is what is old is new again. And what I mean by that is a lot of us probably remember having a cellar nozzle on an engine. And then over a period of time, those cellar nozzles got pushed to the back of the compartment or maybe even taken off the truck. And now some people, through the research that's being done, the changes in building construction, San Francisco was one with the representative from San Francisco Fire Department. Basically, after our first tech panel meeting, went back and he found one of the old cellar nozzles that used to be on the truck, and he put it back on the truck. A few months later, sure enough, cellar fire downtown San Francisco. They tried multiple times to make the push down the stairs, weren't able to, cut a hole in the floor, dropped the Breslin distributor down through the floor, and extinguished the fire. It was a tough fire, lasted several hours, but that's the quick synopsis. But any of the panel members want to chime in what you were doing in the past or what you're doing today? You know, if you get a basement fire today in your community, how are you combating that? And then we can relate that to what we're studying in the research project.
Well, I'll jump in. It's twofold, I think. It depends on what part of town we're going to as to what our tactics are going to be. In our older areas, we're still going to try to make our interior push like we have in the past. It just depends on, again, it depends on fire load, it depends on conditions, what we see on arrival. But when we get out into the newer McMansions that we've got, you know, the cellar nozzle is absolutely an option. We put it back on our rigs as well because we had a job in a mutual aid town that we went. Their first in crew was getting ready to hard charge through the front door when a chief officer pulled up and held them back a little bit because he didn't like the volume of fire in that basement that they were getting ready to go over. And had he not done that, the entire engine crew would have been in the basement with big problems. And he went through the window with a cellar nozzle at that point and knocked it down before and then they went in and cleaned everything up. So again, I think it depends on it's a lot to do with your construction and a lot to do with your staffing. You know, do you have the staffing to make an interior push into a basement fire? Because it's not something a two-man engine company probably should be doing right off the bat. You know, you might want to wait for the cavalry. And the other big thing, and I've read all the line of duty death reports as well, but one of the big things that you have to do in these fires is you have to make sure that you've got the adequate water supply ready to go before you make that interior push. Because losing water in a basement fire or a cellar fire is really a death sentence. You can't just bail out the window so quickly. So these are things that go back to our training, go back to our staff, and then it goes back to how we're applying water to the fire, I think.
Yeah, I can chime in on that real quick as well. And just, although as I said earlier, and I absolutely agree, I'm really looking forward to seeing the data and seeing the study on this and see it formalized and have some numbers and different readings and stuff like that from all the instrumentation to go with it. I really, at least to a certain degree in my own mind, have, I don't want to say made up my mind, but I think a big portion of the fire service from the information we've already seen from previous line of duty deaths and previous UL studies and NIST studies and things like that, with such compelling information about basement fires, not to the degree that this new UL ISFSI study is going to go into, but with information that's already been there to a certain degree, understanding that in a lot of cases, if it's possible to get a quick hit on that basement through some type of alternative means, whether that be a small, ground level basement window or a walkout or whatever the case may be, I think there's already a compelling argument even before this study to really go down that road a lot. I know I tell people all the time, if I pulled up to a fire tomorrow that had fire blowing out a ground level basement window, the first place that my line is going to go is that ground level basement window to give a quick shot on that fire before we go inside. And not everybody's going to agree with that. And I understand that there's certainly no consensus in the fire service on that yet. But I really think there's already some compelling, there's enough compelling information to at least warrant that as a consideration, just from information that's already out there and studies that have already been done. So not to take away from what's going on, but I hope that some people's minds are already going that way. And the other reason I bring that up is when you start to get into the discussion about modern fire behavior and some of the, the fire service infighting and things like that go on with a lot of the issues as it relates to modern fire behavior in this topic, in these studies, and this whole thing we have going on in the fire service right now. What I found is that basement fires is a good place to start to get some common ground, because there are so many case studies and there are so many fatality incidents and things like that involving basement fires. If you start that conversation about modern fire behavior, if you start that conversation about exterior attack and things like that with basement fires, then you'll usually find that people are a little bit more like, oh, yeah, I mean, I guess if it was a basement fire, I could see knocking it through a window real quick before you go crawling around on top of it and stuff like that. And so sometimes you can use basement fires as a little bit of common ground that people, even your rough and tough, hard charger guys that want to be real boastful about all this kind of stuff and kind of shuck aside all the science and data. Sometimes even those folks are willing to entertain a discussion about basement fires and exterior attack and things like that in those situations. So I think it's a good starting point for that as well.
Absolutely. Seth, do you want to add anything?
I think Chief Halton has something to add there.
Well, so it begs the question, if we're going to put a quick shot through the window, why not do a hard hit through the window? Why not just blast the ever-living heck out of the fire with overwhelming amounts of water? I guess the worst case scenario would be if someone was in there, they might drown eventually. But hopefully we wouldn't have to let it get to that point. The second point for me is I love the term modern fire behavior because it's pretty much what it's been since 1945. And I have the incredible luxury of having fire engineering magazines back that far. And the other day I tweeted out a link to an article from Fire Engineering in 1945 about plastics and heat release rates and modern fire behavior. So I wasn't born in 45, and I'm an old firefighter. And so if you were born in 45, that would make you around 72 if you were born then. So if you're fighting fire then, arguably at the age of 15, you'd be like 94. So those folks notwithstanding, it's just what it is. It's the fuel load. It's what fires are. And so we know that. And then when we're talking about basement fires, remember basements is a broad category, and there's cellars and there's basements and there's there's commercial basements, there's residential basements. So I think we kind of have to be careful about how we put all those together, right? Because lots of times, especially in our commercial fires, those below grade fires are going to have utility panels and accesses down there where you can have tremendous repercussions with hose stream management. So I think that some of the stuff what Seth said is absolutely beautiful, and I think that that everybody is on board with the research and everybody's interested in the data that's coming out. It's the interpretation of it where I think people get nuanced and where they get and that has to do with your experiences and your training and your environment and your resources, and that's fine. I mean, I think that's healthy. That's good. So I think when we're talking about the basement fire, some of the stuff that I find that I've been reading over the last 10 years that I really enjoy, I think some folks are really kind of paying attention to it on the commercial side, on the urban side, is that if you read some of the Chicago FD fires where they've had some pretty interesting below grade events in the last 10, 15 years, where they've been going heavy duty with the foam. I don't know if how many of you have been following that, but that's a really interesting tactic that they've been using and really darn successful too. The Chicago FD, obviously one of the most elegant and refined fire departments in the world, does an amazing job of deploying to those below grade fires, as does most of our urban fire departments. I'm just highlighting Chicago because I know there's a plethora of information. If you're going to Google below grade fires, Chicago is going to come up a bunch. Highly successful events too. On the residential side, as Seth was talking about a second ago, That's where it gets a lot more nuanced, right? Where we have the life safety issue, we have more of a high degree of uncertainty, and you put all those categories together, limited resources, high degree of uncertainty, risk, and time, and all of that. The decision-making process becomes more animated, if you will, to where we look at that RPD model and move down that road versus the commercial urban, where I think there's a little more, as Kahneman would say, level 2, weighing options kind of stuff that goes on. But if we look at the residential side of it, even as Seth was saying, if you put a large amount of water into the basement and you can get to the seat of the fire from the exterior, I'm going down that path personally here with the guys and gals that I work with at the Limestone Fire Protection District, where I'm still volunteering. I'm going down that road just because I just don't see there's no advantage to going to the top of the basement stair in an interior basement residential opportunity, opening up that chimney and then trying to, in the old school, we used to try to slide under the what's now called the flow path, but the hot air gravity currents that are rushing out. Remember, we used to try to ride in with the cool air to try to get in faster than that plane would come together and beat the tar out of us to try to get our line in operation, right? So I agree with Seth. If there's a window to take and put a boatload of water through it, that I'm all for it. The only thing about basement nozzles, and we used to have cellar nozzles, and we still carry them out here. We had cellar nozzles, we had cellar pipes, which were basically, it was a Bresnan that hung off a pipe, and you shove it through the casement window, and it becomes like a sprinkler head over there. Because if you're going to do the other way to drop a basement is you'd cut the floor, but then you got to worry about insulation, you got to worry about flooring, you got to worry about joy. I mean, it's a longer deal, right? And meanwhile, if you're doing it in the right location, unfortunately, you're over the fire, which I did an extensive study, and I can tell you unequivocally from my science that fire burns up, and being on top of it's not a good idea. So that's a neat tactic, and I think if you can do it, and you've got a I would work off of ladders. You know how like the Milwaukee guys do the 2 ladders on the roof, and they really neat tactic. I would almost like kind of think about that if you're going to cut the floor to drop a cellar nozzle or a Bresnan. And how many holes in the Bresnan, Pegram? How many holes? How many holes? Come on, dang it, you loser. 9. Anyway.
That was 9. A 5.
I know. I had to add real quick. I read my fingers don't work that quick anymore, Seth. So I think that what I think is
I have a finger for you.
Yeah, right. But what I think is neat about this conversation is we've got piercing nozzles, we got cellar nozzles. Hell, we just got a big old tip through the window. We've got foam. We've got such a plethora of tools at our disposal. And I think the key to implementing them is exactly what the IFSI is doing for us now. Playing with all of them and then giving us the impetus to drill with all of them, right? Because from that drill comes our options in the real world, in context, right? So, if you haven't played with your Bresnan, if you haven't played with your cellar pipe, if you haven't, practiced or messed around with it, you're not going to do it under pressure when you've got competing things for your attention and your resources, right? So I dig the heck out of the fact that we're doing stuff, right? And I also dig the heck out of the fact that the job of the scientists, the researchers, is to shed light. It's not to master. It's to shed light so that the folks out there in the real world who are fighting fires forward, in the real world, in real time, in real homes, rescuing real people, can make the decisions as to how to use that information. And that's the beauty of having a group like the IFSI involved, and cool people like Seth and others who are taking those risks, right? Who can't just make stuff up, and they're not the back office. Hell, they're the front office, right? You're the guy taking the tickets. You're not the guy setting the prices. And so that's really important, real world stuff to me that I dig. But so here, for a little volunteer job that we have, we've brought back the cellar pipe. We have Breslin distributors. We don't have a lot of basement fires residential here in Oklahoma because most of our stuff is built on slab, but we do hit the occasional basement in some of the more upscale properties, and then on some of the people who have some walkouts. But it's not a real common fire for this neck of the woods. And the Southwest is kind of a slab kind of world, whereas the East Coast is more of a more basement kind of world. But they do happen, and on the commercial side, they're probably more frequent in the Southwest. So great topic, love the input, but I don't see the problem with having a line operating through the window on the seat of the fire, knocking the heck out of it. I mean, basements are hard to survive if you're a civilian down there.
Yeah, absolutely, Bobby. And you actually segued right into my next note, which was to ask the panel a little bit. One of the topics came up in the technical panel as we were just basically polling the audience of all the different people from large metropolitan departments to small volunteer departments and everything in between. What tactics, what equipment were they using on basement fires? And the vast majority, even with all the different things that are out there on the market, we're still subscribing to the flaps down, collar up, get at the top of the stairs and get down the interior stairs as quickly as possible. But the need to coordinate ventilation and the knowledge from San Francisco, Washington, D.C., a few others, that if you go that route and ventilation isn't coordinated, somebody all of a sudden vents all the basement windows or the slider on the rear of the building at the same time, you're now caught in that flow path. And that has been a contributing factor in several line of duty deaths. But Chief Morris, Gary Morris, is the rep from IAFC Safety, Health, and Survival section. And he brought up an interesting point that, like you, in his area of Arizona, there's not a lot of basements, but they get a lot of lightning strikes and they get a lot of attic fires. And their tactic for attic fires is piercing nozzles. They found that if they went in and pulled the ceilings and tried to get lines up in the attic, they were basically not only being effective with water, but they're also adding a lot of air and oxygen to the fire. So they have switched to using piercing nozzles and just punching a piercing nozzle up into the attic and letting it flow for 30 seconds and then moving down the hallway or moving to the next room. There's a lot of good effects. So the question was brought to the tech panel, well, what if you take the piercing nozzle and turn it upside down and instead punch it through the floor, essentially inserting a sprinkler head into the room? So that's one of the things we are studying and we are doing. But that's the purpose of that tech panel, is for everybody to give us input on what tools are out there that are on the market that we are using or maybe we should be using. And I think we'll get some data from that as we go through this. Don't want to give away too much, but the one thing we have noticed already is the importance of getting the water into the space, not necessarily right above the fire. But if you get water into the space, it's having a positive effect.
So, but just a real quick thought there. A piercing nozzle, 90 gallons a minute maybe, right? And Seth's idea, you take a deuce and a half through the casement window at 250. I'm with Seth.
Well, it's an interesting point, because when we were talking about the very first meeting on how we're going to do this, how we're going to build the prop, getting advice from everybody, the piercing nozzle and the cellar nozzle really got kind of thrown out there as not being a very important thing. And there's two guys on the panel from Montana, me being one of them, and I started my career using the piercing nozzle as a transitional attack on attics and basement fires. And I was convinced, I'm like, no, you guys are missing it. This is going to be the answer. I even was so passionate about it, I went back to my station, turned it on with my guys, filmed it, and sent it back to Dan and Steve saying, we got to try this. I went out and bought one of those nozzles, and it's effective, but it's not as effective as what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be the answer of all answers. So that's a really cool piece about, me being passionate and thinking that I know everything about this tactic, and really being proven, with good research, that there's a lot better ways to do the job that we've been doing all along. Chris, you want to...
It looked like Bobby had something to say, but I'm going to go to Chris real quick. Chris, can you hear us? And can you unmute your speaker?
Yeah, hi, I can hear you. Sorry about the
All right,
technical
awesome.
issues I had.
Chris, real quick, I know you had a little technical difficulty. Real quick, just introduce yourself. Chris is one of our technical panel members.
Hi, I'm Christopher Divver. I'm a lieutenant with the Clifton, New Jersey Fire Department, and I'm on the ISFSI tech panel representing the company officer section of the IAFC.
So, Chris, obviously you've been listening in. We've been talking a little bit about the project and the background. As a company officer, when we say basement fire to you, what are some of the things that pop into your mind, and some of the things as a technical panel member that you wanted to make sure we looked at or tried?
We have a lot of basements where I come from, and they're mostly used for living space. They're not, a lot of them are used for storage, but we have a lot of single room occupancies. So a basement fire in our district has the very likelihood of having victims inside there. So what I've seen with the live burns we've done, any amount of water, whether it's through a window, through a door, into the basement, any amount of water is making a significant difference on the fire. You're interrupting the flow path. It doesn't matter if it's 250 gallons a minute, 30 gallons a minute, any amount of water is having a positive influence on us and putting the fire out, or at least knocking it down so that we can go in and not put guys into an inferno, especially not going from the top down like we used to. So I think from my perspective and talk with the guys in my department, so far what we've done has been very positive, and I think it's going to continue to do so.
Absolutely. One of the things that was mentioned in all these different appliances that we're trying, and we'll get data on the effectiveness, not only of extinguishing the fire, but just cooling the environment to make it safer for victims and to make it safer for firefighters operating. We were talking about hitting it hard with a 2.5 and just flowing the 2.5 through the window. But one of the things we're looking at is fog nail, which is actually something I'm not familiar with. Brad, do you want to chime in on this a little bit? Because I know the fog nail is something that we are going to use in some of the testing at Delco.
You know what? I tell you, Chief, I'm not really going to have that much to contribute on it. I know what it is. I've certainly read some articles about it. I've seen some case studies of it being used effectively for attic fires and things like that. I just know that it's kind of a piercing nozzle that's smaller and lower flow GPM. There's a lot of folks out there that could speak to it better than I could. I'm probably not the best to talk about it. I don't know if anybody else has any insight or not.
Well, we're covering all of those nozzles, and most importantly, trying to figure out from a water mapping standpoint the penetration and the reach from these different types of nozzles, whether you're going through the front door, cutting a hole in the floor, or pushing it through a window, or having to act like a residential sprinkler system in there. So everything's being covered, and again, what we're finding is, so far, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but the most amount of water from the safest location seems to be working pretty well.
And something else that I think maybe deserves mentioning with this, and again, I always kind of go global and look at the whole this whole discussion that we're having in the fire service about fire behavior and fire dynamics and things like that, and look at things from a little bit bigger perspective. But a question that we get a lot from already existing research that's been done, whether it be the basement fire portion of the Spartanburg, South Carolina burns, or some of the stuff on Governor's Island about basements and water flow and things like that. And some bring up the question, well, if you're sending a crew to a Bravo side or Delta side window, or a Charlie side walkout or something like that, what about the victims inside? Are you delaying entry? Is that going to have a negative effect on the victims? Would you wait to send in your search crew? I've had that question posed to me many times. Would you wait to send in your search crew through the front door while you were sending a crew to make a Charlie side hit on a walkout basement? And my answer to that is always absolutely not. Absolutely not. I would be perfectly comfortable with sending simultaneous crews in, one to do, whatever, VEIS operations into second floor bedrooms, straight through the front door to do typical primary search operations on the first floor or the second floor, or whatever the case may be, even with a water application from any of the multitude of other methods we've been talking about today and are being studied in the UL ISFSI study. in no way, shape, or form does any of this water application stuff have a negative effect on life safety. Obviously, if you're dealing with one crew for an extended period of time and things like that, it's going to be several minutes before an initial crew arrives and things like that, then maybe we could start to talk about some of those issues. But as far as if I have, close by arrivals, i.e. an urban setting or something like that, where I have a truck crew pull up with the engine, absolutely, all day long, I would be comfortable with applying water through a Delta Bravo or Delta side, basement window or a Charlie side walkout while at the exact same time sending crews in. And again, just thinking in my head of some of the stuff from Spartanburg and even some of the things that Dan and NIST when he was still with NIST still did when they did the Cherry Road revisited studies, for lack of a better term. I forget exactly what he termed it, but the concept of applying water while crews are operating on the first floor, not an issue. So anyway, I didn't mean to derail things there, but I just oftentimes the life safety and the primary search stuff comes up, and water application and primary search don't have to be, it doesn't have to be a mutually exclusive thing. They can absolutely go on at the same time when it comes to water application with all of these different methods that we're talking about.
I think a lot of us would agree, if the resources are there to do things simultaneously, that's the best way to do it. Get water on the fire, take care of ventilation, coordinate ventilation with fire tech, but also get that search done, make rescues, all that sort of stuff. The problem we run into in a lot of places that I'm familiar with and where I work is we don't get the manpower. We get the manpower eventually, but we don't get it all within a few minutes or sequentially. So, we're getting the first engine, then a couple minutes later, the second engine, a couple minutes later. And yeah, at the 10-minute mark, you got the whole first alarm assignment there. And I think, but I've often said that, don't forget your staffing in all these discussions, because we can recommend all kinds of different things, tools, tactics, and everything else. But really, it comes back to your staffing. Aaron, I want to go to you real quick, because I know a lot of the training that you do outside of work revolves around commercial buildings. I know at FDIC, you teach a class on big box stores. And I think it's important for people to understand that this research, we're talking about the residential basement fire. The prop that we've built is a ranch home with a full basement, finished basement. But maybe, comment a little bit about the differences or the challenges of the commercial building, which is not part of this research project, but I think it's important to mention it.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things that we definitely want to get out to everybody. And with all the studies that are being done, and the science is fantastic, and we need to employ this with what we're doing, but we also have to put it in the proper setting. So that was one of the concerns I would have, is that our listeners understand that the studies and the tests that are being done today in Delco are based on that residential. Because when we get into the commercial, we understand, and we need to convey to our people, especially those who've never been in these types of fires, that it's a drastic difference between the fire load with whatever we may have down there, whether, if we're looking at taxpayers or restaurants or local pubs in a more urban setting, and I know that I'm sure Chris sees this up in Clifton as well. We're going to have larger utilities coming in. We're going to have fuel oil storage, things like that in the basements. We're going to have far more product stored in the basement, whether it be food stuff or just material being sold at the local hardware store that has it. And so tactically, we're going to require a lot more water. Tactically, our searches are going to be far different, and we may not be able to get in there to do them right away because the need to push so much water in. We run into the windowless basements in the commercials all the time. It wasn't that long ago that New Jersey addressed this issue with the fire code and required that windowless basements now be sprinklered and alarmed up to a certain amount of square footage. So these are all things that we need to impress on everybody out there, is that this is going to be far different. The stretches are usually longer, and you usually have a lot more of a both dead and live load above you when you're going into a commercial style basement. So these are all things that are going to affect it. One of the things that I like that somebody brought up was reach and penetration of the stream. I'm a big proponent of 2.5-inch lines. I've been pushing that long before we were getting out good studies of it, simply because in my career we were more successful with them, and once we practiced with them, we got good at it. I can tell you that I went to 3 working fires yesterday. There were 4 in Hamilton Township. All 3 in Hamilton that led off with a 2.5-inch line. So there's things that we need to keep pushing. As far as, I got 2 other things I'll hit on real quickly, and then let you know. I know we're getting towards the end of the show. The fog nail. I don't know enough about the fog nail to criticize it or say or give it my God's honest blessing. It's the most wonderful thing ever. It's another thing that if it works for somebody else, that's fantastic. My detractor of that would be, man, for years we've been preaching, don't get on these lightweight wood truss roofs. Don't get on this lightweight construction. I don't know. Maybe you can apply it through the tip of the aerial or through the bucket on these types of fires. But if you're afraid to go to the roof to ventilate the roof, or you're not afraid to go to the roof to apply the fog nail at it. So again, I'm ignorant to that level of training. I haven't used it. I would love to try it out and make my own opinion based on that, but it's just a question I throw to the panel. And the other thing when it comes to attic fires, since we kind of split the two, was before he passed away, E.J. Mascaro was a big proponent of taking the gable end of a building, opening up the gable end and flowing hard through the gable end of the building. Because they, again, manpower issues, things like that, especially in some of the departments that he was doing training in. And to pick up on what EJ was pushing, we've done that. And we found it to be very effective by putting people less in a collapse zone, less above a fire, and flowing with good reach and penetration. So it's just a simple, another idea. We did it yesterday at a job, and I actually caught a little crap about it because why are you doing it that way? Because it works, and it worked for us. And we didn't jeopardize any of our personnel, yet we were still aggressively fighting the fire and applying a boatload of water to it. So I'll get off my soapbox, and and there you have my thoughts on those things.
No, I think the technical panel hit on a lot of that, and one of the concerns the tech panel had was making sure that the basement just wasn't a big wide open room. Right. So no matter where you applied water, you were hitting, the majority of the content. So when this building was built, they specifically designed it so the interior stairs are in the middle, coming down from upstairs, basically coming off the kitchen area. And they also built a utility room. Now, there's nothing really in the utility room, but there is a utility room. So, for example, if you attempt to extinguish the fire from the Bravo side and the fire is on the Delta side, you cannot put water on that fire. Now, you can put water into the basement, and the results are going to show what that does. And I'll give you a hint, it helps. But obviously, getting water directly on the seat of the fire is the best thing. But I think the challenge with basement fires is the limited access. And when we're talking about a windowless basement or a basement that just has very small windows, it's trying to figure out what's the best way to get water on the fire. And also reducing the exposure on our firefighters in the process. We know from the line of duty deaths that getting them caught in the flow path can be a really bad thing. And that's been documented multiple times. And everybody that's on the tech panel that were from departments, most of them larger metro departments, say, yeah, that's a bad thing. What was also interesting is that some of them commented that the line of duty deaths that they have experienced and the basement fires that they've experienced have forced them to change their strategy, tactics, and training. But others said that, no, we still operate under the same SOPs that we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I think this whole conversation is going to be pretty interesting as we continue to go through the research burns and look at the data. The really cool thing that UL is able to do is not only are they giving us data on the fire itself, but they're giving us data on the rooms upstairs. So there is a part of this where we're not necessarily looking specifically at victim survivability, but we are collecting that data. So we're getting readings of what the oxygen level, what the carbon monoxide level is at the floor, I think it's 4 inches, 4 feet, and 8 feet in all the rooms. And already, the research is showing what we've been advocating here recently is a closed bedroom door. If you walk through the test prop on July 13th, you will see that one of the bedrooms they leave open on every burn, and one of the bedrooms they leave closed. And the closed bedroom pretty much doesn't look like there's been a fire in the building. Even when they had it really stoked up and the door at the top of the stairs open so that basement staircase was acting as a chimney up to the first floor, the closed bedroom door was still a survivable space. So not specific to strategy and tactics of basement fires, but an important lesson that we're once again reinforcing. We're at almost at the top of the hour. I wanted to make sure our tech panel members, Chris or Seth especially, had the opportunity to mention anything that we may have left out or final comments. And just reminding people once again, Delaware County, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia, July 13th, Observation Day. Anybody and everybody is welcome to attend, but you do have to pre-register at isfsi.org. Seth or Chris?
Yeah, super humbled to be part of this project. I'm really, I think the big take-home message with this project for me is just how much work is involved with this. I'm just, again, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I'm just blown away with how much effort and time is spent by UL to make sure that this project is done right from the front end. Even down to building a deck around the entire structure to make sure that we can't cheat as far as nozzle placements to simulate ground on these window attacks. I mean, it's just it's staggering. So I'm really excited to be part of this project, and it's shown me how important this stuff is for the fire service, both on the front end and on the back end.
Chris, any parting thoughts?
No, I think that was really good. I'm sorry I missed not all of it, but most of it. But I appreciate the opportunity to join, and looking forward to seeing everybody next week in Delco. Thanks, Steve.
Absolutely. Brad or Aaron?
Yeah. Go ahead, Aaron.
No, I just said the same thing. And listen, I really applaud the IFSI for what they're doing and the fact that they got UL involved in this. I think grant money is actually being applied to something that matters to firefighters down the road, which is really nice to see. And I look forward to the results. And I thank you guys for what you're doing. And it's actually in between 2 of my 24, so I may do my best to get out to Delco. It's not too far a ride.
Oh, that's cool. Brad?
Yeah, just thanks to Chief Halton and for you, Chief Pegram, for having me on again this month. I will unfortunately not be able to make it over to Delco on the 13th. I'm involved in some high-rise training that we've got going on internally within our department that's been scheduled for a while. So it breaks my heart, but I will not be over there. But I will be following very, very closely. So looking forward to seeing how the 13th goes, and hope that there's a great turnout out there. I think the cool thing is that UL and ISFSI really have been an open book with this research, just like UL has been with every other study, where they open the doors for people to come in. There's no smoke and mirrors. There's no backroom talk deciding the future of the fire service and things like that. It's just simply an open book, and show up and be a part of it. And this is a great opportunity to do so. So regrettably, I won't be there, but I hope you have a great turnout, and I'll be following closely. Thanks.
I think it's important, obviously, for those that can't make it to Delaware County, obviously all the social media channels will be providing updates and information throughout the day, Twitter, Facebook, etc. But again, I would encourage people to come out. And the other thing is we would like to hear from you. So if you have questions on this project, questions about what we're testing, the layout of the building, things like that, feel free to reach out to any of us here on this Humpday Hangout, or through to the ISFSI directly through our website. Emails and everything are on there. But what makes the projects good and useful to the American Fire Service is everybody's input and people asking questions. And that, if you go back to Steve Kerber's keynote at FDIC a few years ago, he sees his job as answering the why question for the fire service. And so we, ISFSI, have asked some questions about basement fires, and we're trying to figure that out. But there's also and always going to be additional why questions. And already we've seen things that we didn't expect. First couple of fires did not necessarily go how we expected them to go because of all the different factors that are involved, in wind and air movement and ventilation and energy efficient windows and doors and things like that. But I think it's important that the fire service get involved and ask those questions up front so the tech panel can review them and we can figure out how to research and study those things rather than wait until it's all over and then ask 100,000 questions of why we didn't do this or why we didn't do that. So now is the opportunity for the American Fire Service to ask the why question on basement fires. we're going to continue burning through the month of August. And then August through the end of the year, we'll be working on crunching the data and developing a training curriculum that we hope to take on the road in early 2018. So with all that said, we're at the top of the hour. I appreciate Chief Halton allowing us to be here once again for our Humpday Hangout. We'll be back the first Wednesday of the month in August, believe it or not already. Summer is flying by. And between now and then, I wish everybody good luck on the training burns and the observation day, July 13th. And we will talk to you next month. Thanks for coming out.